This is She Creates Business, a podcast for wedding pros. Your host, Kinsey Roberts, interviews incredible women in the wedding industry who are making their mark and creating success on their terms. Join the conversation.
Well, hey there and happy Tuesday. Welcome to episode 42 of She Creates Business, a podcast for wedding pros. This is your host, Kinsey Roberts, and thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited about today's episode because I am solo on the show again, which is really fun for me. I love chatting with you guys one-on-one. And today, from the title, you might recognize that we are going to be talking about the what, the why, and the how of being a podcast guest. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You might be sitting there thinking, Kinsey, I'm a wedding professional. I don't need to know this. I'm not really interested in being a podcast guest. And so I really hope you'll stick with me today, because if you're thinking that you don't want to be a guest on other podcasts, then I'm hoping to change your mind. Or maybe you're listening and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're doing this. I have been wanting to become a guest on podcasts, so this is going to be great for me. If you fall into the second camp, awesome. Today's episode is totally for you. If you fall into the first camp and you think that being a podcast guest is not for you, well then hang with me and allow me to change your mind, because I think that you will find a lot of value out of what I'm going to say. And even some of the tips I'm going to cover aren't just for being a podcast guest. They're also for if you want to be a speaker somewhere, or if you want to, be a guest on a webinar or what have you, anything. If you need to pitch someone to come into their space and be in front of their audience, these tips will still apply. Today, I'm going to be talking about them specifically as they relate to being a podcast guest, but I think that you could transfer. If you are totally against being a podcast guest, then listen in, and I think you could transfer them to another way of, coming into someone else's audience. So let's get started, shall we? The first thing I'm going to talk to you about is the why of being a podcast guest. And that's something that you kind of need to figure out. I've come up with some tips for you, or some ideas about maybe why you would want to be a podcast guest, but you also need to figure that out for yourself. Decide, why do you think being a podcast guest would help your business, or why it would help you personally, or why it should be part of your marketing plan, or, any of those reasons. So some of the things that I have found about being a podcast guest, or that others have told me about why they are doing it, are the following. The first is, this is very simple, and I think it's a reason why anyone should be a guest on a podcast, is that it helps improve your speaking skills. Even though you're not face-to-face in front of people, it's a really great way to get started speaking, because it's not as intimidating. You are on an audio call. You are many times not even on video. I know a lot of podcasters do that. They will record their guest on video as well but I don't. We're just audio only, so I don't even see my guest. They could be in sweatpants or just out of the shower. I don't even know. Sometimes I'm in sweatpants, but we don't record video. So it's really not intimidating as, other speaking. If you're especially if you're just getting started with speaking, or you're just getting started with your speaking career, being a guest on a podcast can do a couple of things. It can help you, just kind of hone your speaking skills in general, but also, and then another reason I wrote down why you might want to be a guest is it can help you hone your message. What is it that you're trying to say? What is it that you're trying to communicate to other people? What do you want to be known for? What do you want people to think of when they hear your name? Do you want to be like the preeminent planner in your area, or the preeminent photographer? Or do you want to be known as someone who other vendors love to work with, so they recommend their brides to everybody, or they always recommend their brides to you because you're just so easy and amazing to work with? Podcast guesting can do that for you. It can help you say, okay, this is what I want to be known for, so I am going to become a guest on podcasts so I can be helpful and spread, XYZ message. And then you can work on doing that. So improving your speaking skills and improving the message that you want to share about yourself and about your business. Being a podcast guest can do that for you. The second thing might be, maybe you want to grow your personal and professional network. I know that this has been a huge one for me. I have been able to make a ton of friends. I have been able to grow both of my personal and professional networks. They're kind of intertwined, and I love that. I've made friends with such amazing women and just have heard the stories, and you've heard them too, you guys. Haven't we heard together amazing stories from other wedding professionals? I adore how multifaceted my guests are. We're all not just planners or venue owners or photographers or caterers or designers. There are so many facets to everyone's business who I bring on. Maybe they're speakers, or they publish books, or they're mentors, or they train other professionals. It's just so fun. So if you're looking to grow your personal and professional network within our industry, being a guest on podcasts is a great way to do that. That doesn't take up a lot of time because, and I'll get into this in the how, yes, you do need to network with hosts and things of that nature, but it doesn't take you the time it takes you to get dressed, to drive to a networking event, spend 2 hours there, come home, get undressed. You know what I mean? It doesn't take you that kind of time. So you can really network and expand your own network in a easy but fun way. I really believe that being a podcast guest can do that for you. So that's another reason, maybe you're interested in that. And I also will tell you this, and I'll get into this a little more as well, but you don't have to just be on podcasts about weddings, right? Like, I know we're all wedding professionals or we're all creative entrepreneurs in some way, but you don't have to just be on business shows or interview shows like this one or wedding shows. You are a multifaceted individual, and I'm guessing you have a lot of interests, and maybe there are even interests outside of your wedding work, even if you're a mentor or something, that would be a great fit for you to go on podcasts for. I'll give you a really awesome example. Shalise Tyson, who was my guest on Tuesday, February 14th, she is a wedding planner and she is a mentor to other wedding planners, but she also has another creative pursuit, which is as the blog manager of the More Community. And the More Community is an online community of mothers who are also creative entrepreneurs. So yes, it does have a business aspect, but the main thing is that everyone is a mom, right? Just like Shalise is. And so even though she's a wedding planner, great, but she could also go on podcasts about communities for moms, about motherhood, about being a blog manager, about, supporting other mothers in business. It doesn't just have to be an interview show like mine about her career as a wedding planner. She has that other creative pursuit as that blog manager for the More Community. So there's a lot of other opportunity for her to go out and seek podcasts if she was interested about that topic and, about anything. Maybe, I don't know this, but maybe she's a gourmet chef secretly. She could go on cooking shows. I mean, there are so many different varieties of podcasts, and I'm going to get to that in just a second, but don't just, put yourself in a box and say, well, I'm a wedding professional and Kinsey has a wedding show, so I guess I'll have to go on other wedding shows. That's not true at all. My podcast is one in so many. I'm just a little baby bird podcaster. So you have, the sky is the limit, and I know you have a lot of other interests. So you can grow your personal and professional network in other ways besides just wedding shows. I'll talk about that later. Okay, the other reason maybe you want to go on podcast as a guest that I think would be wonderful is to gain credibility as the go-to person in your industry or in that other creative pursuit we just talked about. Maybe you do want to become the go-to planner. Maybe you do want to become the go-to photographer. Maybe you just want to have some audio files to be able to take your clients to. I mean, if you're sending emails to your clients, you could pop your interviews in your signature, like a little bit.ly link in your signature. And that's a real credibility builder, I think. When people hear you online and they hear you being interviewed on other shows, they are going, especially as it relates to, your wedding business, I'm talking about that now, they are really going to that's going to, in their mind, really raise you because they don't, not everyone is familiar with iTunes or not everyone is familiar with podcasting. And so to hear you in an interview show that they could plug into their car or on their iPhone, they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This girl must be the real deal. And it's interesting. A lot of people that I meet outside of my online business life and, face to face, they don't even know what podcasting is. So I always say, and I'm getting a little off track, but I hear a lot online that, is podcasting saturated? I want to start a show, but I feel like it's saturated. And I'm like, No, it isn't. Not even by a long shot. Not even close. Not even a little bit. Not one person in my face-to-face life has been like, oh yes, podcasting. I listen all the time. They have been like, I'm sorry, what's a podcast? What do I do? And then I have to get on their iPhone and subscribe them to a bunch of shows, or I get on their Android and help them even know how to play a podcast because they're like, how do I find Google Play? Or how do I find Stitcher? So A, don't think that podcasting is saturated because it's not. And B, back to my main point, your clients will really respect that. If you say, hey, go to this link where I was interviewed, I'm talking about, I don't know, I'm talking about, the 10 ways that you can work with your wedding planner, and you give that to your wedding planning clients. Or, if you're a photographer and you're saying the 10 poses you don't want to forget at your wedding and you've been interviewed about that, it's just a credibility builder, right? And same if it's kind of business to business. If you want to work with other vendors with styled shoots, or if you want to become a speaker again, being the go-to person on these podcast episodes, that can also build your credibility with other businesses. So B2C and B2B, right? Okay. The other one, I already mentioned that, so it can help. Here's one. So if you are already blogging, or maybe you're microblogging on Instagram, or, things of that nature, being a guest on someone's show is a great way to put your message in another content medium without having to start your own show, which I'll get to in just a second. But if you're blogging and you love blogging, you can put your content onto someone else's show and write a blog post about that. So you're not the one who has to do all the work of putting together a podcast, but you have that, and now you have that other medium. It's audio, right? You can share it. You can write a blog post about being interviewed. One of my past guests, Candice Coppola, she wrote a blog post about her first interview on the show. And first of all, as a host, I greatly appreciated that. I couldn't believe it when I saw that. That was so wonderful of her, and that was really above and beyond as a guest, and I'll talk about that as well. But it was a blog post for her too, so she didn't have to think what she was going to post that day. It was just kind of a recap of how she was on my show, and again, as the host, I really appreciated that. So it was really a win-win. And so you can put your message in another medium that you don't actually have to do much work on, if that makes sense. So what I was just mentioning is you don't have to actually put together the whole podcast. Well, maybe you have been thinking of starting a podcast. And sidebar, if you are, I would love that. I encourage everyone to start a podcast. It is an amazing, amazing medium. It is so much fun. It is way easier than you think. And anyway, we'll talk about that later. But being a guest is an awesome way to test if you even like podcasting, because you don't have to do all of the back end work that involves being a host and having your own show. All you have to do is show up, do the interview, sign off, and you're done. And you can decide, do I even like delivering my message this way? Do I like delivering my message via audio? Does it make sense? Is it fun for me? And if the answer is no, well, good for you. Then you didn't have to start a whole podcast to find that out. You just had to do a few interviews for someone else's show, and then you can be done with it. If you love it and you're obsessed with it and you are dying to talk more with your audience one-on-one, well, maybe starting a podcast is a good idea for you. So becoming a guest, being helpful, sharing your message with others, and helping them along their journey is a great way to decide, hey, I love podcasting. I think I will start my own. And the other thing is you can get in front of your ideal audience or your ideal client. There are so many, again, we talked about this, there are so many podcasts, you guys, and specifically talking about our businesses, our wedding businesses, there are podcasts strictly dedicated to couples. So newly engaged couples or couples in the throes of wedding planning who do interview-based shows, and even non-interview-based shows, but they still might be good ones for you to check out. They might make an exception for you. I will talk to you about that in a second, about how to become a guest, but a couple of them that I was thinking offhand, there's one called Bride Chilla, there's one called the Wedding Planning Podcast, From Ring to Veil, Put a Ring on It, Engaged. The Engaged podcast actually interviews real couples, but maybe that would be a great way for you to introduce some of your couples to the Engaged podcast and say, hey, if you're not listening to this, these are real couples that are speaking to these hosts, and if you're interested in being on, why don't you shoot them a message? Wouldn't that be, just doing that for your couples is fun. Maybe they would like to be interviewed, or you are also bringing them to content that can help them and also entertain them during their journey, which which again raises you, it raises you up and it says, hey, Kinsey or Sally or whoever, she's actually listening to me. She cares about me. She's thinking about me even when she's not doing my wedding work. And so here's all these resources that I now have, and you have now become that excellent curator. So anyway, something to think about. Those were just the ones I found in like 3 seconds on iTunes. Those podcasts I just mentioned. I know there's more, but I just wanted you to know that if you are interested in being interviewed from the aspect, not from your business aspect, like I interview guests, but from your skill aspect, so that you can talk to your ideal client and be seen as an authority in the photography world, the floral world, the design world, the planning world, then podcasts geared towards couples could be for you, right? Okay. So finally, and these are just a few of the ones that I wrote out. There's so many other reasons why you might want to be a guest on podcasts. But finally, if you just want to make friends in your industry, this is a great way to do it. Or in another industry, as I mentioned, like Shalise Tyson, she's the blog manager of the More community. Maybe she would like to expand her friendships into that community, and she wants to be interviewed on podcasts for moms. That's a great way. This is a great way to do it, is to become a guest on shows. And a couple of reasons. You're building a relationship with the host. You are building a relationship with their audience because you're providing helpful content to them, and you are leading them and helping them through whatever their journey they're going through. And, you can make friends. People will connect with you because podcasting is such an intimate medium. I mean, sitting in your ears for 30 minutes, you and I are having a conversation. It's nothing like reading a blog post. It's so much more intimate than that. So, if you just want to make friends, podcast guesting is an awesome way to do that. I have absolutely made friends with people who have been on my show. One example is Cinnamon Wolf. She was a guest. We talked about SEO and blogging back very early in the show, and now her and I are great friends. We talk on Facebook. We were just at the VIP Intensive in DC that was hosted by Raina Pomeroy and Tanya Dalton together, and that was the first time we met in person, but it already felt like we knew each other because we've built a friendship from this podcast. And Cinnamon is one of my great friends now, and I love her to death. And so Cinnamon, if you're listening, hey girl. Also, you guys, and I'll save the details, but Cinnamon is starting her own podcast, and I cannot wait to share with you. Hope it's okay if I said that. I actually don't know if it was, so I might edit this out, or I might not. I'm not sure, but I'm really proud of her, and I'm so excited for her. So either you're welcome, or I'm really sorry for spilling the beans. But you do need to check it out. It's going to be incredible. Okay. So those are some of the points about why. Why should you be a guest on podcasts, and why it can help you and things of that nature. So let's kind of move into the how. Let's move into, okay, you have decided, Kinsey, you've convinced me, I do want to be a guest on podcasts. It sounds super fun. Now, how do I do it? These are just some best practices. A lot of them are my own opinion based on being a host and a guest of podcasts. They are not hard and fast rules. I consider them personal best practices, and I don't know everything. So if you don't agree with them, that's totally fine. There is no scientific, mathematical formula for becoming a guest on shows. There are some times when someone and I will connect in a Facebook group, through a Facebook thread, and then I'm on their show, or they'll come on my show, and that has worked. It's been very casual. We've realized we have the same interests, and we're like, hey, let's get on each other's show. Okay, sounds good. But if you're actively looking to be a guest on podcasts, this could help you. But don't discount those casual connections where you really connect with someone and you're like, hey, you're awesome. I love what you're doing on your show. There's definitely a place for that. So don't think that it always has to be what I'm about to tell you. I'm certainly not like the podcast, end all be all. These are just things that I think could help you. So with that disclaimer out of the way, here's a couple of things that I have found helpful as a host. The first is I love when guests pitch me and they know me and they know my show, seemingly. I don't know if they've been following me, but it seems like they have. And I really, really appreciate that because two things. Either A, they are actually listeners of my show, and I love that. Or B, they have taken the time to do the research about my show, and I can't tell that they're not listeners, right? maybe they researched it for 30 minutes and that's it. Even still, they took 30 minutes out of their day to kind of see what I was about and say, okay, I think I'm a good fit. And then they pitch me. I really greatly appreciate that because they care about us, you guys. They care about you, my listeners. They care about me as the host. And I appreciate that because I am a human being. I am not a robot behind this microphone, and I want people to be nice, right? Don't we all just want that? Can we just agree? I don't want people to just be like, hey girl, I hear you have, thousands of listeners. Can I come on your show? No. Because that doesn't make me feel good. It kind of hurts my feelings. So I am still a human being and I make emotional decisions sometimes. I'm not ashamed to say that. I try to make professional decisions most of the time, but I'm also a person and a woman and a girl. So I'm not a girl. I'm a woman. You guys, I am like stuttering over my words today. I don't know why. Anyway, so know what the host is doing, know what their show is about, and also know the kind of guests they've had on the show in the past so that you can pitch something that they will be more willing to bring on their show. What do I mean by that? Here's what I mean. I have had quite a few shows about, and I have another one coming up about book publishing. I've covered it from a couple of different angles, but it's all been about books. Now, it's still been wedding professionals, but it's been about their journey with book publishing in some way, shape, or form. So Tiffany Wayne was on in episode 6. We talked about her publishing a photography book. Then Candace Coppola came on. We talked about her publishing The White Dress in Color with 2 of her friends, and that was also a traditionally published book. I have another woman coming on. We're going to be talking about her amazing book that just came out. And so I'm not really looking for more book topics. So if someone pitches me, oh, I'd like to talk about my book, but they don't tell me any other angle, I'm right now, because I have so many episodes about books, I'm not going to spend my time like, okay, how can we come at this from a different angle? I'm just going to say no. If they don't make the effort to say, I would like to talk about my book in this way, here's how I think it applies to your audience and your show, I'm just going to say no. Not because I don't want to have them on in the future, but because I don't have the time at the moment to really try to work this episode and say, okay, she has a book about this. I need to read the book first. And then I need to figure out how we can talk about it on my show. I'm just not doing that right now. So it's not because I don't want them on the show. It's because I've already published shows about books. So my suggestion to you is to go back 3, 4, 5 episodes, however many make you feel comfortable, especially if you're not already a consistent listener to the show. It's okay. You don't have to be. Let me back up and say this really quick. You do not have to be an avid, super duper consumer listener of a show to be a guest on the show. I know I've had a lot of people on my podcast who were not listeners before, or maybe they're still not, but they've listened, but they did their research and they also really support the show regardless. So just know that what I'm telling you now is to know the show and know the host is important for you before you pitch, but don't feel like you need to absolutely be their best number one listener before you pitch. That's just not necessary. But anyway, so know what kind of episodes they've had, know the kind of guests and the topics that they've covered, so that if you have kind of a similar topic, let's say you're a wedding planner or you're a coach for other wedding professionals, you need to come at your topic not just from the sense of, I'm a wedding planner, would you like to have me on your show, but what can you bring to their audience? And you're not going to know what you can bring until you see what kind of topics they've covered, so you can get an idea of what their listeners are interested in. So that's the one thing. The other thing is to, even if you're not listening to the show, make sure you like it. And that goes along with listening to a couple of the episodes. Make sure you like the theme, the topics, make sure you like the host, make sure you like how they run their interviews, make sure you appreciate how they treat their guests and how they treat their listeners. You want to make sure, those are all just people things, right? So just make sure you actually like the show. Even if you're not an avid listener, that's okay. You'll know what I mean. If you listen, there's podcasts out there that we start and then we stop because there's just something about it that we don't like, right? So make sure that's not happening with this show, because you're going to want to share it. And if you don't like the show, or if you don't like their other guests or whatever, you're not going to feel comfortable sharing it. And then what's the point? So make sure you actually like the show. And I would also something that I do, this is from my perspective as a host. I do like to seek out my own guests a lot of the time. I have a lot of fun just seeing what other women are doing in the industry and showcasing the amazing work that they're doing. And so I enjoy the research part. I enjoy following other women online, and I will comment on their stuff and follow them for a while and see what they're doing before I ask them to be a guest on my show, because now I'm familiar with them. I know what they have coming up. I can kind of sense that. I keep my ear to the ground. I can sense what they have coming up. I can sense like if they're going to publish a book, or if they have a course coming out, or if they're doing something interesting in their business, or if they're doing something interesting in their personal life that is affecting their business and they're sharing these things. And so then I can think like it would be fun to have them on the show for XYZ, and I approach them specifically with these topics. And so yes, that sounds like work, and it is, but not really, because I enjoy it and I love my guests so much and I love finding them. And so I'm telling you that from the host perspective, but you can absolutely do that from the guest perspective, and you should. You can seek out podcasts that you love. You can become an avid listener. You can share the episodes. You can share what the host is doing. Maybe they're publishing, blog posts that you enjoy reading. Maybe they have courses coming out, things of that nature. So if you enjoy that, maybe like spread the love a little bit before you approach them to be on their show. And it does sound a little bit like, okay, well, I'll do you a favor and then maybe you'll do me a favor. And that is true. But again, we're all just human beings. Don't we want people to be interested in us before they ask us for a favor? That's just human nature. That's not weird. It's just human nature, you guys. And I don't know why everybody forgets about that in business. Or it seems like they do. It seems like you just email people like, hey, can you do this for me? And you're like, hey, you, who are you again? Like, who are you? How do I know you? I don't know you. So just be normal. Like if you need me to do something for you, I'm typically happy to do it because I just love this kind of stuff, but also, maybe do something for me first, right? And that's kind of how I treat people. And let me back up and say, please don't do this just to get a guest spot on a podcast. Actually mean it. That's why I like to go find my own guests a lot of the times, because I'm not just saying, oh, she looks good, I guess I'll comment on a few Instagram posts and then I'll pitch her to be a guest on my show. Every single time that I have asked someone to come on my show, it's because I've been following them for a while, and I'm going to talk to you about this in a second because we've met in person, and I adore them and I love what they're doing and I want to learn more from them and I want to bring them to you so that we can all learn together. That's what I want. And I think it shows in the way that I speak to people. I think it shows in the way that I email people, in the way that I ask them to come on the show. I care. And I kind of want to say a 4-letter word right now, but I'm not going to. I give about my guests and my listeners. I care so deeply about you guys, and I want us to just kind of do this thing called online business and wedding business and life together. And so that's how I find my guests, and that's how I make relationships with my listeners, because I'm interested. And so, yes, it is okay if you're not always like, oh my gosh, I love you so much and I'm going to do this thing for you. It's totally acceptable to, do a couple things like comment, share some stuff, and then approach people. That is an awesome business tactic, and it doesn't make you disingenuine. It makes you really smart. But if you can be as genuine as possible, I highly encourage that, because again, and I'm always going to say this, we are all just human beings. So let's just treat each other with respect and be nice. How does that sound? Awesome. Okay. What's the next thing? Oh, so I was telling you that a lot of times I've met people in person before I pitch them. And actually, you guys, like the first 10 guests on my show, this, were all from the Creative at Heart conference here in Denver in 2016. So I had met all these women in person. I was freaking blown away by them. They were so amazing, so nice, doing incredibly brilliant things, and they were so giving. And I was just like, I wonder if they'd be willing to come on the show, because I developed so many one-on-one conversations at that conference, and I was just so excited to talk to them about this kind of stuff that I approached them with my ideas, and it was specific. Like when I asked Ashley Iben from Ashley Iben Photography to come on, her and I connected over her daughter, who is a little spitfire, and I love her. I think I've talked about her before. She's amazing. We connected over her daughter and just being moms, and I loved Ashley's take on being a business owner and a mom. So I brought her on to talk about that because she's so good at it and she's just so realistic, and I loved her approach. So I brought her on to talk about that. And then Jenny Tai, who was on the show in episode 3, I've talked about her before. She was on the wedding planning panel. She has so many years of experience, and she is still passionate about this industry and about education and about getting the right information out in the world. And so I asked her to come on and talk about education as professionals in the wedding industry, and she did. And so pick up these things when you're at conferences, when you're at networking opportunities, even when you're picking up your kids from school or whatever. Pick up on these little things that people are really good at, because when you bring them on to your show, if you have it in the future, or if you get on their show to talk about stuff, you can pick up what they're really passionate about, and then they're going to be amazing friends, to talk to about these sort of things. They're also going to be amazing hosts to talk to because they're going to be excited about what you have to talk about, and vice versa. So try to pick up on that. You don't have to go and make notes about it. You can if you totally want to. I'm fine with that. But you can also just pick up on these things that people are passionate about, and then, speak to them from that angle. So as a guest, or a person who would like to be a guest, what I'm saying is following your host and sharing and seeing what they're doing, and then picking up on what they're really passionate about, looking at it through your lens. How can you apply it through what you're good at teaching, and then asking and then pitching them that? I feel like that's a home run. Of course they're going to say yes. Why wouldn't they? I would. Anyway, okay, I hope that's helpful, and I think I've made my point there. I'm sorry, I felt like I beat that dead horse for a while. So sorry. Let's all just act like normal human beings now. I just talked a lot about that. Okay. So this is kind of just logistical, is pitch the host either through email. So find their email, or whatever way they're asking for pitches. So my email address is on my website. I also tell people through the podcast they can email me, but I also have a guest submission contact form on my website, and I really wish more people would use it. The people who use it typically get a yes from me, and it's not that the people who don't use it don't ever get a yes, but again, this is just super logistical. The only reason I say that is because it's really hard for me to keep track of everything that's coming in, like emails and Facebook messages and Instagram DMs and, comments on Facebook posts in other Facebook groups, just because they're all over the place. Not because I'm like a busy human being who's flooded with requests. That's not it. I'm sorry. I don't mean to sound like that. I'm just saying that there's so many different locations to try to remember to look at, that it would be awesome if everything was just funneled through one place. And I really think that boils down to just systems and processes. And we all love those, right? We want that in our business. So anyway, do try to find out how the host likes to be pitched. So if they have a contact form for guest submissions in general, use that contact form, because that's how they've asked to be pitched. And the other thing too is like Instagram DMs, and I'm sure you guys know this, but a lot of times I will get a message and I won't really see it until now that I knew this, but I didn't know this at the beginning, that if we're not connected on Instagram, your message isn't going to come right to me. It's going to actually be a request that I have to accept. And it's the same thing with Facebook. And I consistently forget to look at those message requests on Facebook. And on Instagram, it's not that apparent. It just says it on the upper right-hand side. It says, X number of requests, and it's in just like normal letters. And so sometimes I'm not even looking at that. So anyway, those messages don't always go through if you're already not connected on those social networks. Just remember, so, if you really want to get on this show, you might as well just go through either their email address or their contact form, because they might not check those message requests, because they are kind of funky, aren't they? I don't know why Facebook and Instagram do that. I guess I get it, but it's all kind of weird. So pitch them in the way that they want to be pitched appropriately, right? So pitch them the way they want to be pitched, have an actual topic that you want to talk about. And then let me get into this then. Have a podcast one sheet. It is so much easier to pitch hosts with a podcast one sheet, and I absolutely love it when guests do this for me. A podcast one sheet is basically like your media kit as a podcast guest. It includes your name, your contact information, what you're an expert in, so the things that you can talk about, why you are the appropriate person to talk about those things, and your bio, of course, in the third person, so that they just have to read it if they want to. I typically put my bios together. They're pretty short and sweet at the beginning. You know this. But in the third person. So instead of saying I, say she. So Kinsey and she instead of me and I. So that they could just read it if they want to. And it also includes some sample questions that they could ask you as part of your interview. It makes the host's live so easy. They're just like, oh, here is a whole information about Kinsey and why she should be a guest on my show. Ashlyn Carter did this for me when she pitched me about coming on copywriting, and I absolutely loved it. She didn't have a podcast one sheet separate, but she basically had all of that information in the body of her email. And you guys, I cannot tell you how much I loved it. I said yes immediately. This was actually funny because I had already downloaded one of her free downloads about copywriting, and I really wanted to bring her on the show anyway. And it was kind of kismet because I was thinking to myself, I need to contact Ashlyn Carter to see if she is even interested in coming on, because I know she's very busy and sought after. And then I think that day, I'm not kidding you, I cannot make this stuff up. That day or the next day, she emailed me to ask, and I was like, yes, 100%. I was literally just going to email you. So anyway, but what she did was she had all of that podcast one sheet information in the body of the email, including questions that I could potentially ask her if I wanted to, which, you guys, for me, especially for her topic about copywriting, that was immensely helpful because I am not a copywriter and I know exactly zero about copywriting. And so some of the questions that she included, which were awesome questions and ended up being very great information, if she hadn't have given me that, I wouldn't have known to ask those questions because I don't know anything about copywriting, and they were very specifically related to copywriting. So anyway, Ashlyn, shout out to you for being such an awesome pitcher. Podcast guesting, not baseball. But it was, super helpful. So anyway, have a podcast one sheet. If you don't know what I'm talking about, feel free to go to my free sample of a podcast one sheet. I actually created this for Carly, who is the host of the She and Company podcast that I was a guest on a couple weeks ago. We talked about being a podcast guest and starting your own podcast. And I created this opt-in specifically for her guests. And I'm going to get to that in a second. And it's at shecreatesbusinesspodcast.com/Carly. Karli is how you spell that, Carly, Karli. And I'll put that link in the show notes. That's a sample of how you can create your own one sheet. It's super easy. I did it for free in Canva, and I really highly recommend you have one. Now, a podcast one sheet does not replace your personality and your personable pitch in the email body. So don't include all of your one sheet information in the email body, but you still need to be personable. You still need to make it clear that this is a pitch. You still need to say, here's what I would like to speak on. Here's why I think I'm a good fit. I've attached my podcast one sheet for your convenience. It includes my bio, how I can be contacted, plus questions I think might be great for your listeners to hear. That was just a sample. Anyway, so you can find that at shecreatesbusinesspodcast.com/Carly, Karli. Anyway, that'll be in the show notes. So also too, if you're driving, don't stop. Just tap your podcast player later and click on the link. Okay, which brings me to my next thing. If you want to get real value out of being a podcast guest, okay, let me say this. If you just want to be a podcast guest to maybe make some friends, expand your personal network and improve your speaking skills, then this isn't really going to apply. And I would also like to point out that those are very valid goals, and that is completely fine. You do not have to measure every single thing in order for it to be valuable. So if those are your goals, this next part's not really going to apply. But if you do want to use being a podcast guest to either grow your business, get in front of your ideal client, measure it in some way so you can understand if it's actually being a valuable part of your marketing plan, then this is a really good idea. Please, at the end of every podcast, most hosts will ask you how their listeners can find you, or what you're excited about, or tell us what you have in store for the next year, or what have you. Only send their listeners to one place, and that one place should be an opt-in so you can capture their email address so that you can gain some value from being a guest, from spending your time, 30 minutes to an hour, whatever it is, on that show with some sort of super valuable opt-in, just like the podcast one sheet. I created that specifically for Carly's audience. It was very timely because it's exactly what we were talking about in her episode. And I have been able to capture email addresses from people opting in to receive that one sheet. So it's a win for everybody. I'm giving even more value in that opt-in, more value than I even gave in the podcast episode. And I'm now capturing their email address so I can stay in touch with them again. And they're not just lost to me, they can only hear my interview and that's it. So now we can build our own relationship outside of our relationship her listeners and me that we have with Carly, right? So send them to one place. And the other reason that you should do that, and I think the one place should be an opt-in page, is because you can track it. If that opt-in is only for if that opt-in is only for that episode, then you can look in your email system and say, okay, I have had 25 people come to this page and I have a 50% conversion rate. Then you know that that 50% conversion rate is strictly from that podcast episode. Now my metrics are going to be skewed since I'm sharing that link with you on this episode of my own show, but prior to this show, I know that every single person who opted into that one sheet is from Carly's show. And so I can see how that episode has performed for me from a marketing perspective. So you actually will have data in front of you that will tell you what being a guest is doing for your business, right? So send them to one spot. I recommend an opt-in because we know that growing our email lists is a really great way to build our business. And that's the one thing that we own. You can send them anywhere you want to. It doesn't have to be an opt-in. That's my recommendation, but it could also just be your Instagram page if you want it to be. Like if you're active over there, fine, make it Instagram. You're not going to be able to measure who's coming from your podcast guest spots, but if that's where you're active, you can totally send them there, or Facebook, whatever it is. It's totally up to you, but only send them to one spot. Try to avoid being like, oh, I created an opt-in for you. You can go to shecreatesbusinesspodcast.com/Carly. You can also find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter. I have a Pinterest page. I also have a Google Voice phone number. Because that is their podcast guests are already probably multitasking, or podcast listeners, they're already multitasking. They might be working out, driving, cleaning the kitchen, whatever, working, and then listening. So if you give them too many choices, they're going to do nothing. That's the paradox of choice. Now they don't want to do anything because they're just like, that is too many things. No, thank you. Whereas if you just say, come to Instagram, I'm super active over there, and I always answer all of my private messages or something. I don't know. Make it enticing for them to come over there. Or like for me, when I was on Carly's show, come over to shecreatesbusinesspodcast.com/Carly. There's a sample of a podcast one sheet over there for you. It goes into detail about how to create one. Plus I show you exactly what a sample one looks like. Boom, done. It lines up with the topic that we discussed, and it's something free for them with way more value than they probably expected, right? Okay, cool. So let's see, what else can we talk about here? So, you know what? I think that was my kind of final thing about being a podcast guest. I think that if you do these things, figure out why you want to be a guest. You can have multiple reasons. Figure out how you can contact the host to, be a really genuine supporter of the show, how you can contact them in a great way that makes them understand that you know what their show is about and that you're going to honor and value their listeners just like they do. Great. And, if you pitch appropriately in the way that they want to be pitched, and also make it very easy for them to say yes by providing them with that one sheet, then, I feel like you guys have a really good shot at becoming guests on shows. And I would like to say that if someone says no, it's not no to you. It's just no to that. It could be no to anything. It could be not right now because I'm booked out till June. I am. It could be no because I like to find my own guests. I do also that. Like a lot of times I'm not accepting pitches because I do love to find my own guests. Not all people do, and that's totally fine, but I love it. I love finding guests. I also love getting pitches. So, either one is fine with me. I am certainly not opposed to either one, but I just want you to know that we're all going to get no's. I've gotten no's. I'm sure you've gotten no's of other stuff, and that is okay. No one is rejecting us personally. They're just saying, hey, not right now. Ask if you can follow up. I always do that. When I'm getting rejected, and I have in the past couple of weeks, I just say, okay, thank you for responding. I really appreciate it. Is there a good time where I could maybe follow up and reintroduce a topic that might be of more interest to you? And every single time, except for once, every time, and this has been like 5 times, I think, in the last month, they were like, hey, thanks for asking. You absolutely can. In fact, the reason I said no is because I am booked out through September, or the reason I'm saying no is because I'm not really interested personally in that topic right now. But why don't you reach back out to me in the middle of the summer? And I'm going to do that. And, yes, I feel kind of silly when people tell me no. I'm like, oh man, I feel silly. I shouldn't have pitched. But then they thank me for asking if I could follow up. And then that makes me feel better. And now I have it in my calendar to follow up. So actually do that. And I'll feel better about it. They could still say no, but guess what? I'm not going to let them down by not following up and not being a person of my word. Anyway, so it's not a personal rejection. You are still awesome. I love you. I'm sure they like you too. And, they're not being a podcast guest is not even close to the measure of your worth. I just want you to know that. So if people say no, which is going to happen, that is okay, right? You are still awesome. Okay. Little pep talk there. I think I needed that myself because I have gotten rejected about 5 times in the last month. And so it was a little bit tough, but also humbling, and made me realize that I just need to keep moving forward. So if you have had some feelings of rejection lately, you and I can move forward together. We totally can. I know we can. Okay, so I think that does it on the podcast guest, how to become a podcast guest, why you should become a podcast guest. And you guys, I would love to tell you that this show is brought to you by my course that's coming out on March 20th. It's called Podcasting for Creatives. We are going to dive way deeper into this topic and many others. I'm going to teach you how to create a podcast you can be super proud of. It does not have to be a business-related podcast. In fact, I have a little surprise for you later. I'm going to tell you about that later. But you don't have to have a business podcast. Maybe you're interested in something else. I'll tell you something I'm interested in. I am a huge history person, and I also really love reading. Those are two things that are very ingrained passions. I've loved those since I was a little girl. And one of my dreams right now is to be a guest on the What Should I Read Next podcast, which is a podcast hosted by Anne Bogle. She's from Modern Mrs. Darcy, and it is a complete book recommendation show. Mostly they talk about novels, which I love a lot. Sometimes there's nonfiction thrown in there, but it's an amazing show. And so we all have other interests. So if you want to create a podcast, and I just want you to know that it does not have to be about business. And so that is my main message. I cannot wait to cover that and so much more in podcasting for creatives. And if you're interested, head over to my website and click courses. You can sign up for the interest list. You'll be the first to know when the course launches. And I hope that we can just create more podcasts in 2017 that we all enjoy listening to, that we can be very proud of, and that do not have to be about business if we don't want them to be. I want people to know that interview shows about business like this one are not the only shows that exist. So let's head out there. Let's create awesome content. And hope to see you on my interest list for podcasting for creatives. If not, I will see you Thursday for another cool show. And I really appreciate your time today. Hope you're having a great day. And if you have anything to chat about, feel free to hit me up at kinsey@vistaviewevents.com. Bye, guys. See you on Thursday.
Thank you so much for listening to She Creates Business. Please take a minute and head to iTunes to leave an honest review so we can help more wedding pros find the show.